Hello, everyone. Have you ever wondered what the story of the Alamo has to do with Bible interpretation? Well, that's what we're going to learn on this edition of Dr. Todd Explains. Well, this is Dr. Todd Harden, and I am a counseling pastor, professor, and woefully inadequate follower of Christ. And I wanted to kind of give you some insight into something that occurred to me the other day. I was watching the 2004 edition of The Alamo, the movie The Alamo, the one that stars Billy Bob Thornton. And I'd forgotten about how good that movie was. I grew up watching Fess Parker and the Disney version of the Davy Crockett Alamo story, and then, of course, John Wayne. I've been a historical fan, a history buff anyway. But something occurred to me after I watched the movie. I picked up on some things in the movie, and I later on was listening to a podcast that the interviewer was hosting, was talking to a scholar by the name of Stephen Harden, who's not a relation to me as far as I know. But Stephen Harden, Dr. Harden, is a expert on Texas history, especially Texas military history and the Alamo. And he provided some great deal of insight. And I kind of wanted to share that with you today to try to help you see the importance of Bible interpretation and how we can come to understand our Bibles better. Let me go, and by the way, there will be spoiler alerts in this related to the Alamo, the movie I'm talking about. When the movie starts, you see when Billy Bob Thornton, it's not when it starts, but when Billy Bob Thornton comes into the scene at the Alamo, you're seeing a man that's obviously torn. Before he gets to the Alamo, there's a big play that he's attending, and it's the story of Davy Crockett. And so he was a legend in Washington even before he ever went out west. And you get the feeling that he didn't quite feel like he could live up to the legend. And so what you see unfolding in the movie of the Alamo is this man who's torn between the legend and the real man. The real man's name was David Crockett, but the legend that everyone believed in was Davy Crockett. And throughout the movie, you see little hints of, for instance, when he feels uncomfortable when the guy salutes him from stage who's playing him in the movie, because you can never outlive the legend. And later on, when he shows up at the Alamo, he's surprised because he's moving to the Alamo, historically we know, because he wanted a chance to get involved in politics, and it was a new country about to start. And he shows up at the Alamo thinking the fighting's almost over, and he realizes he's walked into a hornet's nest, if you will, and he's trapped. And you could tell he's concerned about it. A little bit later on, when Colonel Travis gives him a place to defend in the Alamo, it's a very dangerous area of the Alamo. And when Travis asks him if that's a problem, he pauses and then says, no, that's what I was going to put in for. But you could tell the real David Crockett didn't want to have anything to do with it. So a little bit further on, he's talking to Jim Bowie, the guy playing Jim Bowie, and they're having a conversation. And he admits that, David Crockett would like to climb over the wall and run away, but a lot of people were expecting a great deal out of Davy Crockett. Now, I tell you all this because I want you to see the background of this man being torn between the legend and the real person. And it's a subtle tech. You just have to pick up on it as you're watching the movie. At the very end of the movie, there's what we would call the Crockett death scene. There was some research that was uncovered a few years ago where apparently Davy Crockett did not die, in the middle of the battle, but was executed after the battle. And in the movie, the way they portrayed it, and there's some historical evidence to show this, it was from a memoir of one of the Mexican officers. But in the movie, he's on the ground with his hands behind his back, and he's on his knees, and he's imminently facing the firing squad, and he looks at General Santa Anna, and he demands General Santa Anna surrender to him, which of course is preposterous, but it was very bold and brazen for him to say that. And then he says, I want to warn you, I'm a screamer. And then all of a sudden he screams and you hear the firing squad and he's killed. Well, okay, big deal. That's what you think. He screams and he yells and then it's over. But as I was listening to the podcast with Dr. Hardin on it, what I discovered was he served as the historical consultant on the movie. And one of the things that Dr. Hardin mentioned was that these people in the original script, when he read it, did not sound like people from 1836. 1835, 1836, I believe it was 1836, I think is when the battle was. And so the director allowed him to change the script and include some things that a person from 1836 would say. Well, the term "I'm a screamer" meant, it didn't mean that he yelled and hollered, if you will. It meant that he was a man of prominence. To say I'm a screamer means I'm a man of prominence. And so when you understand that and you watch the movie, what you see is a man who's torn between the legend, Davy Crockett, and the man, David Crockett, through the whole movie. And he comes to that final moment and he has a decision to make. He's about to die, and he's either going to go out as the man or the legend. And by using the phrase, "I'm a screamer," we see that he's come to grips with who people think he is, and he decides to die as Davy Crockett and not David Crockett. Now, what does this have to do with Bible study or Bible interpretation? It has a lot to do with it. We can watch the movie just like you read the Bible text, and you can understand what's being said, but only with some careful understanding of bridging the gaps of history. We didn't know how people talked in 1836. Culture, we didn't understand the honor culture that was in place at the time. And language, we did not understand how they used the term screamer. But if you bridge those three gaps and understand it, all of a sudden, that portion of the Alamo story takes on a much deeper, more vivid meaning, because it shows us that this part of the story is really the story of a man coming to grips with his own legend. And although the meaning of the story in total doesn't change, our appreciation for the character's development does change, and we have a deeper understanding of the conflict that was going on within this very complex individual. And the same thing can be said from the Bible. We can learn a lot simply by observing it well and reading it, but to understand, we have to do a little digging. We have to understand the history. We have to understand the culture. We have to understand the language. We have to understand the point of view, those kind of things. And once we do that, we have a deeper, more fulfilling meaning of the Bible and how it's interpreted in a given passage. And so I just wanted to kind of leave that with you, that if you want to learn the Bible, you really need to access resources of people that know what they're talking about. We've got 2,000 years of church history, and there's been a lot of smart people that have thought deeply about this, a lot of smart believers that have thought deeply about this. Now, that doesn't substitute reading the Bible. What I'm getting at is, though, until I heard the podcast, I didn't understand those subtle differences that were implanted in the story. And once I understood it, because an expert helped me see that, all of a sudden it took on a completely deeper meaning, and I have a greater appreciation, not only for the man, David Crockett, but also for the movie itself and how much more true to life it was compared to other things like the Fess Parker version or the John Wayne version. Well, I hope this has been helpful. If you enjoy the work I'm doing here, don't forget to hit subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss future videos. If you have any questions and want to interact with me on this, please feel free to do so in the comment section. I'd love to hear your feedback. God bless. We'll talk again soon.